Listen, on Tuesday, I was, so I had yesterday off. I went to a council meeting, interestingly. Yeah, I know. And made decisions about what the rate increase is going to be for um, Otago folk from their regional council. Actually, it's going to be about 6% is the average rate increase, which isn't too bad, you might think. Isn't it interesting? You go, oh, 6%, that's not too bad. Well, New Zealand wage and salary earners, apart from public sector employees, they haven't gone up 6%. The rate of inflation isn't 6%, so people on fixed incomes, in fact, you might argue that those who have got a few savings and are on superannuation, they'd be worse off as a result. But it's just interesting that it got to 6% as a result of some jiggery pokery. So because it's election year, it's all right. I said all this to them yesterday. Because of it's election year, the Otago Regional Council decided to go and raid another pot of money. But essentially the rates only for this year, for a particular stupid idea that they had. Anyhow, it's a long story. Um, it's to do with that environment fund I talked to you about last week. It needed to be aligned with mana whenua values, so they decided to go ahead and create a $2 million a year pot. But they're taking that money this year from their reserves essentially. But next year it'll go on the rates, and then every year after that in perpetuity. Um, but so you can see where the jiggery pokery comes in. Won't be on the rates this year, but they're on next year, and it'll make about a 3% increase in rates. So what would be 6% would normally be 9% this year. But it'll be even so. Next year, that's when you'll start to notice it. But guess what? It's not election year next year, is it? So that's what I'm saying, jiggery pokery. Anyhow, I went to that particular meeting. So that's where I was yesterday. But I left off on Tuesday with the extraordinary press release, and then he gave a press conference on Tuesday afternoon of the police commissioner, Richard Chambers. Now, I was saying to you, was I not, on Tuesday, listen, this directive that basically said we're not going to chase any criminals who commit minor crimes. In fact, we're not even going to investigate them anymore. Remember that one? And the suggestion was that the police commissioner put out a statement on Tuesday morning when I was still on, and then in the afternoon he finally did what he should have done to start with. He fronted up because a whole series of people, including me, were asking questions about, and ironically, the press statement that the police commissioner put out, I only asked more questions. Now, he had a press conference on the Tuesday afternoon seeking to explain this directive that went out. And as you're probably aware of, what I've said on Tuesday on the show was that it struck me as, a rat in blue. The words that were used and the pussyfooting around and the how did this happen and all that sort of stuff. And I have a very clear view on this, and that is that the only reason that there's a change to that memo is because there was pushback from the public, and that memo's existence, after that memo's existence was made public. So it had been in since the 26th of March, so essentially for the last 2 months, and the police had been following that particular memo. It was only as a result of, as I understand, Radio New Zealand utilising the Official Information Act that it became known, and then obviously we got the pushback that we did, and rightly so. Yes, and here's the bit, the yes, but, and I was annoyed with press, and I don't give much for the intellectual ability of the media these days. I know they're as woke as buggery as well, and so I often go on about their bias and their wokeriness, if you like, and the fact that they can't put a story out without putting their own political or ideological slant attached to it. But the other thing that we should worry about is that the media aren't very bright. No, I'm serious. They're just not intellectually able. Now, I don't know whether that's because they're thick anyhow, or because they're mostly young people who eventually leave the media because they realise that they can get more money elsewhere, usually working in the public sector as a communications officer, possibly even a communications manager at the New Zealand Police headquarters. So I've never quite worked out if it's because all the bright people, or those who are a bit aspirational who've got a journalism degree, actually leave journalism in the end to go and do something different, or it's because they're not very bright to start with. I've never quite worked that out. I actually have a bit of a theory that they're not very bright to start with. So I don't think you're getting very intelligent people going into journalism. I've never thought they're very bright to start with, but I think they're getting thicker. And you can sort of get that by the logic, by the way they write stories or present stories. There doesn't seem to be a logical sequence to the way they put the story together. Or alternatively, if they try and do some analysis, they ask or get the wrong question, or they end up in the wrong alleyway. So, and then of course you put the ideological bent over that, and oh God, unsurprisingly, we don't take the media too seriously. Well, Tuesday afternoon was a pretty good example of that, because they let Police Commissioner Richard Chambers get away with talking bollocks. And I'll repeat this. Chambers got caught out, all right, the police commissioner, because a confidential and quiet memo suddenly found its way into the public domain. And essentially it said, if you commit crime of under a certain value, said to the police, don't investigate it. Now, as I noted, and a whole series of other people, including Sean in his conversation with the police minister, I think on Tuesday morning, the reality was that essentially you're giving license to criminal activity in this country, and that a whole range of people, I use my daughter as an example, but a whole range of people will know that the police are useless and won't trust them, because they now know that if they are the victim of crime, the police aren't interested, and ironically, that's their job, So, anyhow, so Chambers came out on Tuesday afternoon, and both a statement and in terms of his press conference, and he said this. He said, "Oh, listen, he said he was disappointed with the memo. It was inconsistent with my expectations." But then he said this: when it comes to retail crime. Okay. And that was the dumbness of the media. What they hadn't worked out, the media, was that Chambers was making a exception to the memo, which was that he was going to actually suspend that memo in terms of retail crime. But other crime, all right, of a so-called minor nature, my daughter, for example, if you have something stolen out of your car, if you get burgled for something less than the value, if you have your purse stolen or something like that, if you're able to identify the people who've stolen your garden ornaments or plants or something like that, you still won't be investigated. And that was, the media didn't ask that question. He went on and on and on about now that he was going to withdraw that memo for retail crime. But for the other rest of the crime that was covered by that memo, not a word. And also not a question from the media on that issue. Listen, the other thing I said also was that he's just another Costa as far as I'm concerned. And perhaps not as bright, actually, Chambers. But one of the other things he said is he didn't expect to be briefed on all internal memos. So what he said was, I didn't know that memo existed. Really? You're the police commissioner. You're sending a memo to all of your district commanders throughout New Zealand not to investigate crime of under a specific value, from $150 to $1,000, depending on what the crime was, and you don't know that? How credible is that? You are saying to all of the sworn police of New Zealand, through your area commanders, not to investigate certain crimes? And you don't know that memo's put out. Now, either Chambers is lying, yes, Police Commissioner, that's what I'm saying. Either you're lying about in your press conference of Tuesday afternoon, or you're incompetent. Why don't you know that? Well, the next answer to that question when he was asked that was, I don't need to know about everything, but because I have a hierarchy and a structure in place to help us with that. Well, it's obviously not working, is it, if that's the truth, Police Commissioner Chambers? Your hierarchy and structure actually managed to tell the New Zealand police not to investigate crime. Full stop. Their job. Or to protect people who were the victims of crime from having it happen to them again, because you'd just given carte blanche to a whole series of petty criminals in this country to conduct their affairs and to make a profit from it. To suggest that you have a quote-unquote hierarchy and a structure in place to help you with that, well, it's not working, is it? And it's probably not working because you don't know, as the police commissioner, what memos are going out that tell your police staff not to investigate crime in this country. I would have thought that was sort of like, oh, basic 101. I better have that across my table because that's actually quite important. But no, he doesn't. Quote unquote, I have a hierarchy and a structure in place to help us with that. Well, if you did, and here's the other this is the other stupid part about it. If you did, why wasn't it working? Would be the obvious question that the media would ask. No, didn't ask that question either. Asked what conversations he'd had with the Police Minister Mark Mitchell, Chambers said the directive was an operational matter. In other words, bugger off, Minister. Quote unquote, this is me as the Commissioner of New Zealand Police once again saying what my expectations are when it comes to retail crime. As I say, that hasn't changed since day one. It's an operational matter for us. It's not a matter for the Minister. Did you hear that, Josh? It's not a matter for the Minister.
That's ridiculous. It's a load of crap.
That is what Chambers said on Tuesday afternoon. Not investigating crime is not an issue, a matter for the Minister. From the useless Police Commissioner, Richard Chambers, who I have to say now makes his predecessor look like the goat by comparison. Those are my thoughts this afternoon or this morning. What are yours?